So we were understanding about the abiotic factors, how the abiotic factors impact the ecosystem. Okay. So we completed the water. Now today we would start with the light. So how light contributes for the ecosystem? Plant needs sunlight for photosynthesis because without
Your
yeah,
presentation
actually it's
is
not
not visible.
yes, yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Now it's visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the plant needs sunlight for photosynthesis. Okay. Without the sunlight, plants cannot make food. The process of making the food for the plant is through the sunlight is called as the photosynthesis. Okay. So small forest plants. What are the small forest plants? It is called as small as in the size of them is small. So it's herbs and shrubs. Okay. They are adapted to photosynthesis optimally under very low light because they're overshadowed. So even if there is very low light, the herbs and shrubs are still able to adapt and still grow because they are overshadowed by the tall and canopy trees. Still, they are able to adjust itself and grow despite of getting very low light for the process of photosynthesis. Many plants depend on sunlight for photoperiodism. Okay, example flowering. Without, see, as you can see the image, the flowering, the sprouting of the flowers, sprouting of it from its seed, it happens only because of the sunlight. And many animals use the diurnal and seasonal variations in light intensity and photoperiod for timing their foraging, reproductive, and migrating activities. So these are the types of activities that the animals use, and because of the light intensity and the photo period, that is the duration of the uh, duration in which the sunlight has is been incident onto that organism. Okay, so that is called as the photo period. So that helps in the migratory activities, the foraging, and the reproductive activities of the species, animals, and the plants. Okay. And next we move on to, so sun is the ultimate source for light and temperature on land because of the sun, and sun is also a good source of vitamin D. Okay. Did someone come in the meeting or it's just a message has been dropped? Okay. The sun is the ultimate source for light and temperature on the land. Deep in the oceans, like deeper than 500 meters, the environment is dark and there is no energy available from the sun. The spectral quality of solar radiation is also important for your life. Because if there is the spectral, what is spectral quality? It means that as you can see the sunlight, okay, so in that it starts from this nanometer, from 380 nanometer, ranges from the 380 nanometers to 780 nanometers. Okay, this is the visible light, the sunlight, which you can see. Okay, that is why it's called the Vibgyor. And in that spectrum, this is called the spectrum of the sunlight. It is important for the life because without the sunlight, it is also not possible for the life to be sustained. So the UV spectrum is harmful to the many organisms. So visible light, visible light is good, but the UV ultraviolet rays is harmful for the human beings and other organisms as well. Not all the color components of the visible spectrum are available for the marine plants because the wavelength of the light, if the wavelength of the light is less, for example, 380 nanometers, it's less, okay? So deep down in the ocean, it is not possible for the entire range of the spectrum of the visible light to reach to the depth of the oceans. That is why not all the color components of the visible spectrum are available for the marine plants. Only those spectrum of the visible light which have a larger wavelength is able to pass through the deeper depths of the ocean and not, yeah, okay. Then we move on to the abiotic factor, which is the fourth one is soil. The nature and properties of soil is differ due to the climate, weathering process, sedimentation, and method of soil development. So, so by this point we understand how the nature and the properties of soil is differed. It is differed due to the four parameters. One is the climate. Due to the climate, the nature and the properties of the soil can also be different. The weathering process, whether through the process of the force of wind, there is a lot of friction on the particles of the soil or not. Okay, and due to the third process of sedimentation, and fourth is the method of soil development, how the soil is developed. That that method is also determines the nature and properties of soil. Next, we move on to the soil composition, grain size, and aggregation. Determine the percolation and water holding capacity of the soils. So, the soil composition, whether it is very coarse in structure or very fine in structure, and the grain size, whether the minutest of the particle, whether the size is very large or small, or the aggregation accumulation. For example, in one specific region, how many particles of the sand are in that region. So that is the aggregation. If it is too high, then it is highly aggregated at that point, otherwise it is less. So that determines the water holding capacity of the soils and the percolation of the soil. And these characteristics and parameters like pH, mineral composition, and topography determine the vegetation and animals in the area. For example, I just told you yesterday's class also, that in some specific region, depending upon the type of the soil, such kinds of animals and vegetation exist in that area. The sand, the type of soil in deserted areas different from that in the Arctic or very cold regions. That is, the mineral composition is also different in that region, the topography and the pH value, the power of hydrogen, whether it is acidic, neutral, or basic. That is also different. So that also determines that whether such kinds of crops would grow in that region or not. Different types of crops would grow in that region, and they also the types of the animals, whether they would exist there or not. In aquatic environment, the sediment characteristic determine the type of benthic animals. So the animals, in the aquatic environment, the sediment characteristic, how the these sediments are formed of the soil, that determines the types of the benthic animals. The types of the animals, aquatic animals that exist in that environment, is dependent upon the sediment characteristics of the soil. So there are 4 points, the responses to the abiotic factors. How the organisms, the living species, the plants and the crops, how they respond to the abiotic factors which we just studied previously. For example, the soil, the sunlight, temperature, humidity, and all those compositions, all those factors. What is the response of each organism to such factors? Organisms maintain a constant internal environment. What is the constant internal environment called as? It is called as the homeostasis. Okay, so homeostasis is that which is the state of equilibrium inside the body. For example, if a person's body is such that if the person goes in an extremely cold region, the body is not able to maintain the balance and not able to keep the body warm, and changes its temperature very quickly, very suddenly, due to the change in the external condition. That means that the body is not in the state of homeostasis. Homeostasis is that type of a condition in which even if the external environmental conditions are varied, but still there is a maintenance, there is a constancy of the internal environment. That is called as the homeostasis. And homeostasis is maintained by four processes. Number one is regulation. Number two is conformation. Number three is migration. And number four is suspension. Now we would go on to these points one by one. Okay. So first we go on to regulation. How the regulation happens. Okay. It is how the contribution of regulation happens for the maintenance of the homeostasis. It is a maintenance. So what is regulation? It is a maintenance of the physiological and behavioral means through which the process of homeostasis is maintained. And what is it? It ensures the constant body temperature. Constant body temperature means the thermoregulation. Thermo means temperature. And constant osmotic concentration, osmoregulation. Osmotic concentration is that the pressure outside, if suppose the pressure of the internal layer is maintained with the external environment, that is called the constant osmotic concentration. But if the temperature, if the pressure is varied, then there's a tendency of the body to reach from higher pressure to the lower pressure till the time the osmotic pressure is not being constant, till the time it doesn't reach the state of the constancy. Okay. So all birds and very few lower vertebrates and invertebrates are the example which produce the homeostasis process through the process of regulation. So what is it? It means that it maintains the homeostasis to physiological functions. Physiological functions means, for example, I give you an example of the yogic practice. Okay, like in winters, our body is not able to maintain warm temperature because there is too much of external outside cold environment. Okay, so then if we perform the Surya and pranayama, then we are able to generate internal heat inside the body. So that is the process through which the physiological functions inside the body changed itself through the process of Surya pranayama, due to which we are able to maintain the homeostasis through the process of regulation. And behavioral means are those means, for example, when we are feeling cold in winters, then we shiver. And through the process of the shivering of the body, we are able to generate friction, or we are able to shake off the body. That movement of the body itself is called as the maintenance of the homeostasis, and that is called the behavioral means of the maintenance of the homeostasis. For example, if in winters we are wearing cold clothes, we are wearing warm clothes, okay, so that we are able to maintain the temperature of the body. That is the behavioral means of maintaining the homeostasis. In cold, in hot seasons, we do not wear much of clothes. We wear only cotton, light clothes, half sleeves or no sleeves, as you can see in the picture. So that is the way of which we are able to maintain the homeostasis through the process of regulation. So thermoregulation in mammals. The success of mammals is mainly due to their ability to maintain a constant body temperature. So this is what the point is. For example, if you in the cold, you are able to feel extremely cold. Your body is not able to maintain that constant body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. That means that you are not being successful in maintaining the homeostasis. So in summer, when outside temperature is more than the body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, sweating occurs. Sweating occurs so that the body temperature is maintained. This results in evaporative cooling and brings down the body temperature, because in summer, the outside temperature is very high. It could be almost 38 degree, 40 degree or more than that, okay? So due to the external hot temperature, the body temperature also rises. To compensate that rise of the temperature, the process of sweating starts. When it starts, it results in the evaporative cooling. So when sweating happens, the evaporative, the liquid is being evaporated in the towards the sky, towards the atmosphere. That cools down the body temperature. And in the winter, when the temperature is very much below 37 degrees Celsius, almost like 20, 15 degrees, sometimes in very cold season, like 2 or 3 degrees, and in some other areas in very cold countries, almost like -20 also. Okay. So shivering occurs, and due to the process of shivering, the person, it produces heat and raises the body temperature. So shivering is not that kind of an effective method, because like there's a limit to shivering. Okay, suppose beyond a certain point, no matter how much shivering you do, you will feel extremely cold. That is why it is advised that even in the extreme winters, because I understand nowadays you are not, it's for most of you, it's very difficult to just come out of the blanket in the early morning at 5 or 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. It's feel very cold. A person really feels like to just remain inside the thick blanket, and when it would become more cold after 1 or 2, 3 months, then it would be almost nearly impossible to just get out of the warm blanket. Okay, so for that, that is why it has been advised in the yogic practice that you keep on doing the Surya Namaskar, you keep on performing the Surya Bidin Pranayama or Bhastika Pranayama, okay, so that you are able to maintain that hot body temperature, so that despite of how cold the external environment is, still you are able to maintain your hot and warm body temperature. Okay. The third point is, the second point is confirmation. Okay, after regulation, we move on to the confirmation. Okay, so response, how the process of confirmation is able to maintain the homeostasis. 99% of animals and nearly all plants cannot maintain a constant internal environment. Their body temperatures or osmotic concentration change with the surrounding conditions. They are called conformers. In aquatic animals, osmotic concentration of body fluid changes with that of the ambient osmotic concentration. So whenever there are most of the animals, majority and nearly all plants, they are not able to maintain the constant internal environment. And what happens is that their body temperature or that osmotic concentration, it is not that they are able to maintain it through some external fact, through some external regulation or the practices to maintain that temperature. It's not that, it's just that they adjust to it. They adjust to the environment so that they are able to maintain a homeostasis just by the process of adjusting. Okay, so that is called as the conformation process. And these kinds of species or animals which maintain their body temperature by adjusting to the external environment are called as the conformers. Okay, so this is the way. And as you can see in the diagram, so like internal level, when it reaches high, okay, and the external level, it also keeps on increasing. So the conformers, they keep on increasing higher, okay, so as to maintain to the external level. So these are called the, like for example, if the regulators are partial, so they would just deviate, and if those are conformers, they would keep on raising higher and adjusting to the external environment. So the next process is migration. How to adjust to the ecosystem, the response to the abiotic factors through the process of migration. So there are many animals like birds that move away temporarily from stressful habit to a more hospitable area and return when stressful period is over. For example, in during winters, the Colorado National Park in Bharatpur, Rajasthan, hosts migratory birds coming from Siberia and other extremely cold northern regions. Okay, so the thing is that suppose if there's some kinds of animals or species or birds, okay, they are in a region, they are living in a region for long duration, and they are already adjusted to that region. Okay, but as I have told you in the yesterday in previous class, that the temperature, the season, the climate of the earth changes seasonally. Okay, so during winters, it could be a possibility that they are able to adjust in warm temperature. Okay, but when it comes winters, and in that region there is extremely cold temperature, so those animals or those species would go to such area where it would be still hotter in the winters. Okay, for example, it is mentioning about the Siberian cranes and migratory birds. That is why it is defined. That is why the term called as migratory birds, because they keep every year they keep on migrating during the winter season. That they go from their host area and then they go towards the warm area, Bharatpur in Rajasthan, so that they are able to adjust to the environment for the entire winter season. And when the winter season gets finished, then they again come back to the original place. So this is the process of migration, the response to the abiotic factor of temperature. Now the fourth factor is called as the suspension. In animals, we know the examples of the suspension. First is the hibernation of the bears during the winters. So hibernation is the process that usually they are very much in activity. Okay, they search for food. They remain very much active. But hibernation is a process in which they kind of remain calm down. Okay, they they resist much of the activity. So during winters, the bears do that. And also there is a process called an estivation of some snails and fishes during the summer. And the third is the diapause, a stage of suspended development of many zooplanktons in lakes and ponds. It means that the development, due to some reasons, due to the factors of responding, of adjust, maintaining that homeostasis, they're suspending their activities. Okay, so like in the, for the example of the snakes and fishes, they suspend their activity during the period of summer. And for the zooplanktons, their development stage is suspended during the during the during the period. Okay, and then that time they are in lakes and ponds, so that is called as the diapause. Pause means the suspension. Okay, so these are the ways, four ways in which you are able to maintain the homeostasis. Okay, then we
So
move on.
what was the second one, sir, about the snails? What is that word?
Estivation.
What
You
do they
can
do? They
write down
don't.
the word.
They become. They become dormant during the stage.
Yeah, they go through the process of just a moment. Usually, usually, see, the thing is that usually during the process of summer, they just remain in the hibernated state. Okay, they do not do much of the activity. They suspend their activity during that period. So that is called as the estivation process, and that happens for the snails and the fishes only during the summertime,
Okay,
not
sir.
during the winters. Okay. Okay, now we move on to the adaptations. Okay, adaptation is the morphological and physiological and behavioral attribute. So these are the types of the attributes, okay, that enables an organism to survive and reproduce in its habitat. So what is adaptation? So for example, the adjustment, like for example, yesterday I gave you the examples of cactus and the camel and the polar bear. Okay, so they are adapting. So the characteristic features of the body of those organisms are such that they are able to survive and reproduce in those habitats. For example, see, as you can see in the picture, the polar bear, it has a very thick fur outside. If suppose you, for example, give that thick fur to that camel on the right side, okay, that person, that camel would die out of, extreme heat. Okay, and if suppose you remove the fur from that polar bear, it would die out of extreme cold. Okay, so that is why God has gifted each organisms such characteristics, such physiological attributes, the functioning of their organs and the systems of the body, such behavioral attributes and the morphological attributes, so as For to enable them to be able to survive and reproduce in that habitat. Okay, so as you can see, the camel, okay, so it has a hump also, and it is able to live in the deserted area without, like yesterday we gave an example, even in deserted area it is able to live without much of intake of the water. And if we as a human being who do not have the adjustability to be able to survive in extreme hot deserted areas, if we were to live over there within just 30 minutes, 40 minutes, we would be very much highly dehydrated. Okay, we would need a lot of water intake. And you can also see the duck. Okay, so you can see the legs, you can see the feet, the fins of the duck. Okay, as you can see in the picture, the fins are used for the padding process, the paddling process, so that it is able to maintain that level. It is able to not sink inside the water. Okay, so that is why, see, you cannot see that kind of a padding kind of a thing in other feet of the animals. It is only in the duck. It is why, so that it can, swim in the water without sinking down. Okay, and it is told that many adaptations, that is the adjustability according to the environment, has been evolved for a very long and evolutionary time and are genetically fixed. So it's not that, for example, the habitat has come up and within just like few days it has the structure of the animals is like that. Due to the process of evolution also, the structure keeps on changing. Okay, like for example, I give an example, like if you can see in the forest areas there are wild dogs. Okay, so what is the difference between the wild dogs and the pet dogs? Like if you see a pet dog outside, okay, so that if you go nearer to that pet dog would wag its tail. Okay, and if you give the food to that dog would, start loving you instantly. Okay, but if you go to the forest and you somehow encounter a wild dog, and it's not just one dog or multiple dogs are there, it is a very rare possibility that you would be able to develop friendship with them, because the wild dogs are such that they survive on, like, survive on the flesh of the other animals they are able to prey upon. Their prey, they have to, because they don't get their own food, they have to get the food by themselves. Here, that is why the wild dogs are actually very strong and they are able to survive in the forest. If you send a pet dog to the forest, it is very normal that the pet dog could die, like after encountering even the most peaceful kind of a wild animal. Okay, so it's like that. That is why it is advised to, not to, that the animals should be exactly at the place where they are, because then they are able to, follow their survival instincts and are strong enough. Right now in today's generation, it is a trend kind of a thing that all the wild animals are becoming pet by the human beings. Okay, like even if it is the example of a tiger or a lion. Okay, I'm not talking about adapting, like adopting them based upon the, if suppose they have been in the zoo, then the person adopts, and that's a very good thing. That's not about the issue. But normally, if you if they remove the organism from its habitat, then it's a possibility that the animal would not become strong and would not be able to adjust to the new environment. But the evolutionary process would be able to increase the adjustment with time. Okay, so this is the process of adaptation. Yes, all right. Okay, did some. Yeah. So now go on to the adaptation of we give an example of adaptation of kangaroo rat. Okay, so kangaroo rat what is it? How is it adapted into the North American deserts? The internal fat oxidation gives water as a byproduct if there is no external source of the water. Okay, so for example, in the American deserts, in the desert there is not much supply of water. It's very much dry. The region is very dry. So the internal fat oxidation of the skin of the body of the rat, that gives water as a byproduct. So when the process of the oxidation happens of the internal fat of the body of the rat, that gives water as a byproduct only if there is less of water outside. Okay, so that is why it is able to adapt in such kind of an environment. The ability to concentrate urine so that the minimal volume of water is used to remove excretory product. So how the kangaroo rat is being adapted in the North American desert? Second method is through the ability to concentrate the urine so that the minimal volume of water is used to remove excretory products. So how this process happens? Whenever you eat something, then the byproducts of excretory products is culminated. Okay, so the excretory products needs to be removed from the body as early as possible. If it doesn't happen, then it could damage the body. If the excretion doesn't happen at its own time, it can create toxins inside the body, and that could damage the body and eventually can also kill the person. That is why it is told that in human beings, our defecation process, our excretory system should be very much good. That is why it is advised to drink daily lot of intake of water, so that whatever food you eat, it is very much easily digested. And do not consume water immediately after food. Consume it like 40 to 50 minutes earlier. Okay, and how is this kangaroo rat able to remove the excretory products? It is through the process of concentrating the urine. So that what happens is that if suppose you keep on like urinating, okay, it won't be concentrated, okay, then it would need more amount of water for be able to remove the excretory product. But if suppose you held on to it, if you're able to concentrate the urine, okay, then in one process only the entire excretory product would be removed through the concentrated urine. Okay, that would utilize the minimum volume of water. That is why it is able to survive in the American desert, because when the minimum volume of water has been consumed by the rat, then that concentrated urine is sufficient enough to remove the excretory product from the excretory waste from the body. Next comes the example of the adaptations of the desert plants. How the desert plants are able to adapt to the ecosystem of the dry ecosystem. There on the surface of the leaf of such plants, there is a presence of thick cuticle. Okay, so the sunken stomata helps to minimize the water loss through the transpiration. The CAMP photosynthetic pathway enables the stomata to remain closed during the daytime. And desert plants like Opuntia have no leaves. They are reduced to spines. Photosynthesis is done through the stems. So what happens is that through the thick cuticles on the leaf, it leads to less of, it leads to more of retention of the water and less of, excretion of the water from the body, from the surface of the leaf. Okay, and it helps in minimizing the water loss through the transpiration. Like we told, I give an example in the previous slide, that for the human beings, whenever there is very hot temperature, then the sweating happens. Okay, and the sweating happens through which it goes to the atmosphere through the process of evaporation, then the body temperature is maintained. But whenever there is thick cuticle on the surface of the leaf of the plant, then, and also this sunken stomata, it minimizes the water loss through the process of transpiration. That is through the process of the evaporating of the sweat of the water to the atmosphere. So that enables in the plants to be able to withstand even the very extreme hot deserted areas. And the example is Opuntia. Next is the example. next we move on to the physiological and the biochemical adaptation to the ecosystem. Okay. So at high altitude, greater than like 3.5 kilometers, okay, 3,500 meters, we feel altitude sickness. The symptoms that we feel when we are going through the process of altitude sickness, we feel nausea, heart palpitations, and fatigue. Why this happens? It's because of the low atmospheric pressure. Because when there is low atmospheric pressure, when the pressure at the higher altitude is very less, then we do not get much of the oxygen supply. And when we do not get much of the oxygen supply, then there is less oxygen inside our blood, and this circulated blood is of less oxygen and more of the CO2. That is why we are facing the symptoms such as nausea, palpitations of the heart, and fatigue. We get fatigued very easily. So if you think that in everyday day-to-day activity you feel fatigued, just you feel very much lazy, you feel fatigued, you feel procrastinated, you think that you get tired very much easily, then that is it is that shows that you must have good intake of you must deep in breathly take as take the maximum amount of the oxygen inside your as you inhale deeply. Okay, try to increase the intake of the water because water molecules has H2O. It also has the oxygen molecule. So try to increase the intake of the water capacity. That will really remove the fatigueness very immediately. Okay. So what happens is that gradually when we are into the high atmospheric, low atmospheric pressure zones at a high altitude, we acclimatize the situation, and the body compensates low oxygen availability by increasing the RBC and breathing rate and decreases the binding capacity of the hemoglobin. So what happens is that how we are able to compensate the low oxygen availability, it happens through the increasing of the utilization of red blood cells inside our body. Okay, and also increasing the breathing rate. So when we increase the breathing rate, then we even breathe through the mouth, we open our mouth. Then the problem is that we are not inhaling the most purified form of the oxygen air, because in the nostril, when we breathe from our nostril, then the hairs inside the nostrils and other um, like composition of the nostrils is such that it is able to purify the impurified air outside in the outside environment. Okay, but when we breathe through the mouth, because when we are at the higher altitude, it is very much necessary to get the more amount of oxygen supply, and that happens to increasing the breathing rate. But then it is a possibility that we would be breathing through the mouth, which could not be good. But if there is no option, then we also have no choice. Okay, and but that would decrease the binding capacity of the hemoglobin to the blood. Okay, so we must make sure that we should increase our lung capacity. Going to those areas is not bad, it's good. It will instead make you more stronger. But it's not that you can go with a weak body or you can go without preparation. You must increase your lung capacity through the process of the pranayama and the yogic practices, the process of nadi shodhan pranayama, that too with performing of the kumbha. The kumbha could increase your lung capacity, and this process of pranayama would automatically increase the oxygen intake inside your body, inside your brain, inside your different parts of the um, different organs of the body. So when you have been completely ready and prepared for by the process of pranayama, then it is the right time that you can explore and go to the higher altitudes. Then you will not feel very much of nausea or heart palpitation and fatigue when climbing the climbing the higher altitude areas. Okay, so we'll wind up with this topic. Okay, if you have any doubts or queries, you can ask. We'll meet in next class. All fine.
Yes, sir.
So did you understand did you understand most of it, or
Yes, sir.
okay?